Hello, everyone, and welcome to Quadrant 4 Politics, the podcast where we discuss all things political from a libertarian and conservative perspective. I'm the libertarian, Riley, and I'm with my co-host, Matt, the conservative. Today we're kind of doing a special episode, a bonus episode, if you will. We saw the movie Vice that just came out. It's in theaters right now, and since it's political related, we figured it'd be fun to do a special episode about the movie, giving a movie review, and then discussing just the overall themes and content that it provides. Matt, are you excited to do this episode?
Thrilled.
Absolutely ecstatic. Before we jump into it, Vice is the movie it just released. It's in theaters right now. It released on Christmas Day 2018. It's about the life of Dick Cheney, specifically his term as vice president to George W. Bush. I believe that was, 2000 through 2008? Is that correct?
2001 to 2009, but yes,
okay.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting film, kind of discussing how he was sort of the mastermind behind the scenes of the W. Bush administration. Is that how they refer to it, or do they just say Bush administration?
Most people say the Bush administration.
Cool. So it was directed by Adam McKay. Christian Bale played Dick Cheney. Matt, what did you think of this movie?
I thought that taking away all politics, all personal beliefs, and let's say I'd never been to America, never lived through the Dick Cheney days, I thought it was an interesting movie and somewhat informative. And I thought it was really well done. I thought it had a lot of good information. It also had a lot of, I think, unnecessary information. It had a lot of skipping back and forth, which didn't...
I think that was more of the artistic direction of the director, and I agree that was a little bit weird. They had some weird framing elements to the movie.
It didn't flow exactly the best. Overall, the movie flowed the best. Just they did have some weird imagery in there, and times it was kind of cool, interesting. Other times it was a little bit
jarring.
Why'd you put that in there, So that's just how I felt about it as a movie. I'm going to talk about some details.
Well, let me tell you how I thought, my general thoughts as well. I think overall, it was a fantastic movie. I think it's a movie that, even if you're not a political person, I don't know if it would interest or be relevant to anyone outside of America. But I think if you live in America and you're just have a minor interest in maybe politics or a little bit of history or just recent presidency, I think it's something that's worth checking out because it was a highly entertaining movie. It was mostly a drama, but it did have some comedic elements to it that just hit perfectly. They had some jokes in there that were absolutely hilarious, and the acting was phenomenal. I think the directing was really good outside of some framing elements I think were a little bit kind of jarring to the structure of the movie, to the flow. But overall, as a movie, I think it was a very entertaining movie and worth seeing. Probably, it's a movie like this is not really theater worthy, I'd say. It's not like a big budget action movie by any means. But if you're bored one day and are interested in what do you call that? A biography, a biodrama, this is one definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, I don't know if I would share your enthusiasm with it. It was definitely a good movie. I wouldn't say fantastic or whatever word you used, but I would say...
Well, I mean, if I was going to go over to a friend's place and be like, what movie do you want to watch? And it's like this or Avengers. I'm going to choose Avengers, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, and, that's you with superheroes. But I would just say, in general, as a movie, I would classify it as good. Wasn't great, wasn't fantastic, wasn't phenomenal.
It's also hard to sit down and watch a political movie just with, friends and family. You kind of have to be with someone who's really into it.
Well, weren't you really into it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
but there's not very many people out there like you and me.
That's true. Maybe our listeners.
As we discussed when we went to the movie, we were probably the youngest people of the demographic of that movie. Everyone else in the theater was decades older than us. Which I was surprised that there were more people in the movie theater at 11 a.m. on a weekday. I mean, I know it's New Year's Eve technically, but
yeah, some people have the day off.
but it was all older people who were retired, probably didn't work. But yeah, I was surprised
Well,
that it did had a decent amount of people in there.
They probably didn't work because they're collecting money from the government to go see movies,
Yeah.
and they can do that at 11 on a weekday.
Exactly.
But no, that's a joke. That's just a joke. All right.
So, anything else that you want to say about the movie? Did you think it was funny? Do you think the comedic elements were funny?
I did think there were some pretty funny moments, and you're right about the timing. Sometimes a joke's just about saying something at just the right time, or just how you nail it down. And I think they did a pretty good job with that. So on the comedy factor, given that it's not a comedy movie, I'd say they did really well with that.
Yeah, it was marketed as a dramedy. Like it was meant to be funnier than it was, but the movie starts out real fucking serious, and then it kind of lightens up a little bit after that, but it retains like a pretty serious tone throughout the movie. But when it was funny, it was really funny, and there were some moments in there like it had an end credits run in the middle of the movie that was a pretty funny joke. That part where they did the Shakespeare thing.
True.
There's, to the audience members, there's going to be some spoilers, but you can't really spoil a movie about history because you know exactly what happens.
Sit down at the table where they pick off the menu.
The menu's reading terrorist ideas and ways to get around like the Geneva Convention and stuff like that.
And
but
how you can bypass Congress or
exactly.
Whatever.
And the Shakespeare scene was a little bit weird. It took me a minute to get into it, but then Dick Cheney started breathing really heavily, and I just couldn't stop laughing because it was so creepy.
His heart attacks were pretty funny.
Yeah, his heart
attacks. And you need to go to the hospital.
It was just so sudden and out of nowhere. But I guess that's how heart attacks are. So overall, I'd say it was a pretty good movie.
Yeah, it was a good movie. It definitely has one of the... So there's the fake end credits in the middle of the movie where it says Dick Cheney left politics and devoted to his family, and then...
He was never heard from the public again.
Exactly. It went up in credits, and then it was like, psych, just kidding. At the actual end credits, they don't do an after credit thing. They do it in the middle of the credit thing, and a guy gets up from the focus group and says, this movie's a liberal bias, and then another person's like, well, it's all backed by facts. And so I think, that's kind of more what our podcast focuses on. So from that point of view, I would say it definitely had a liberal bias, or at least it had an anti-Dick Cheney bias, which that's fine. But obviously if you're somebody who's not well-versed on the Bush days, like myself, I was 5th through 12th grade when it took place, so I was a little bit interested in politics, probably more than most people for my age, but I don't know everything that exactly went on there, so it'd be interesting to see what Dick Cheney has to say about the movie, or other people in the Bush administration. There were a couple other little flaws with it. It didn't really show... There wasn't very much of George Bush in the movie.
Yeah, that was something that I was really disappointed by because, well, I wasn't super disappointed. I think that George Bush got a decent amount of screen time, but it's just that whenever George Bush was on the screen, I was laughing my ass off and I was rooting for him. I was like, that's my man. And, it was just disappointing that we didn't get to see more of him, especially because Sam Rockwell was playing him. He's such a good actor that it was a shame that we didn't get more W.
Also, let's see... Steve Carell played...
Steve Carell was awesome.
Okay, I'm going to have to disagree with you there. He played Donald Rumsfeld, and it took me... Because it was him, I couldn't, replace him in my mind with Donald Rumsfeld. Yeah, so that was really hard for me.
That's understandable, because he is such an iconic character in The Office and some of the other roles he's played. But I think... if you were able to look past his previous characters, I think he did a really good job in that role. Of course, I don't know that person, that real life person, very well, so I'm not sure how he related.
I don't think he really acted. Dick Cheney was kind of cold in person, or just on. Yeah.
The movie was definitely following Dick Cheney, and they did a really good job impersonating him. But everyone else, they probably fictionized for dramatic purposes.
Yeah, and his cold character. But with the Donald Rumsfeld, he at least would smile on camera or whatever. As to where in this one he's like, "Go fuck yourself," and what about me and all that stuff. So The fact of the matter is, you never really know what happens behind the scenes and stuff like that. This gives us one version, and I think a lot of it's probably true, but there are parts in there that
Yeah.
I would
I
disagree
wanted
with.
I wanted to respond to a couple things you said. I definitely agree that the movie had a strong liberal bias, and it's unfortunate because I think that the movie could be really enjoyed by conservatives if it wasn't such an agenda pushing. Like it was. I respect that they didn't attack Republicans directly as much. Like they more just attacked Dick Cheney. And they attacked some of his, like, they mostly attacked him for being a war monger, but some of his more conservative ideas, like anti-regulation and helping oil companies and being against climate change and stuff like that, they didn't dwell on it so much, and that kind of felt good. I didn't feel like I was just being preached to. However, towards the end of the movie, when they had that montage of like school shootings and forest fires, and it was like, this is all Dick Cheney's fault. Yeah, that felt like way too.
Yeah, preachy. They did a montage at the end of just clips of everything going wrong in our country today, and it just kind of was like, this is either Cheney or the Republicans' fault. You know, like, they're why bad things happen. We no longer blame God. We blame the Republicans.
But I did like that the mid-credits scene was kind of a self-aware moment of, like, kind of the current political climate, and they kind of mention, the liberal bias of it. So I appreciate that mid-credit scene. I think that sticking around for that mid-credit scene makes the movie a little bit more worth it, because they're able to say, like, hey, yes, but they're self-aware about it, which is I appreciate.
Yeah.
Man, there was something else I wanted to say. I totally forgot.
So I noticed a couple discrepancies in there. One was there's a guy narrating it the whole time, and he says he's related to Dick Cheney. And
towards the beginning,
and it says you'll find out later. And come to find out, he's a random heart donor, and factually, we don't know who donated the heart.
Yeah. According to the 2 minutes of research I did on the internet.
Yeah. And I remember watching the news the day that happened, and some person came on from the American Heart Association or whatever and said the list for heart transplants is super exclusive. There's no way a president or vice president could move themselves to the top or get moved to the top. It is a very strict list. And they almost made it out like he was just given a free heart because he's Dick Cheney. And then at the end, the guy's laying on the autopsy table, and he's saying, Dick Cheney doesn't refer to this as the heart someone gave me, but as my heart. He's like, that stings a little, or whatever he said, and it's like, we don't know anything about the donor, so I felt like that was kind of,
Well, I understand the message they were saying is that maybe Cheney should be more thankful for the heart that he got from someone else, but
maybe
that's of all the things Dick Cheney did that both sides would consider are wrong, that's a very minimal one.
That's and the fact that they put 10 minutes into that out of a 2-hour movie.
I don't think it was quite 10 minutes.
Him laying there on the bed with his family and then showing the heart and all that. It was about 10 minutes, and that's a good part.
But for
a 2-hour movie,
the narrator was an interesting part of the movie because it made the movie flow better, and it was a nice structure for the movie. But at the beginning, they were the narrator introduced himself, and he said, "I'm related to Dick Cheney in a way." And then my mind was going who is this guy? Is this some secret reveal that we don't know about? And it was unfortunate that in the end he was just some unnamed heart donor that we don't even know.
He's the John Doe heart. Yeah.
The public doesn't know who he is.
For all we know, it could have been some Cheney lover, you know.
And in the movie, they made him he was a soldier at one scene. He had a family and a child in another scene. They made it seem this character had some sort of character growth, but then it just turned out to be no one. And it was a weird choice to make him the narrator. It almost would have made more sense to make the director the narrator because he's the one who's telling the story. But it was interesting, but I think it kind of had a weak payoff. But the payoff was still interesting in the way it happened. It's just I was expecting a whole lot more.
Yeah, I agree. I just think, with the heart thing altogether, I think it just went to push the idea that, he got a free heart because he's Dick Cheney, and that's not how it actually went down. Also, I mean, even to this day, the reasons we invaded Iraq kind of elude some people. I guess I watched an interview with George Bush from Oprah,
Hmm.
and she asks, "So you find out there's no weapons of mass destruction?" And she said, "What was that like for you?" And he's like, "That was one of like the most, he's like a huge moment in his life when he's like, what, like."
Like devastating.
I don't know, like devastating, but like shocking. He's like, "What?
Hmm.
There's no weapons of mass destruction," and so some people say that we entered Iraq so he could get back at his dad who tried to go after Saddam.
Hmm.
Some people, and then this movie more pushes an agenda that, uh, or not necessarily agenda. I'm just saying it pushes a narrative that Cheney was kind of the mastermind, and it was for oil. And there was always that slogan, "No blood for oil." But like, did we get oil out of the Iraq War? Or,
I think so, but I'm not completely versed
if
in that
anything,
subject.
if the movie's true, it's all the more reason for energy independence. We have enough damn oil in America
Yeah.
that we don't need to depend on other
Hmm.
countries that are killing each other and
Yeah.
causing destruction across the world. That
Hmm.
we have enough oil for ourselves here. We don't need to export it to other countries while we import it from others, even if it's saving us money. So, that's not the point of the movie, but it's one thing I took away. Like, I was sitting there thinking, if we just evacuated the state of Alaska, moved people away from the good zones of
Well, Alaska is
Texas.
pretty empty, and there's a lot of oil that they found in North Dakota, and North Dakota's economy is crazy. I think minimum, like not minimum wage, but like you can get a job there as a barista making like $25 an hour because the economy there is booming so much because of the oil business. I know I had uncles go out there framing houses because there were people who were living in their cars because they were drawn from all over the country to go work in North Dakota because there's so many jobs out there, but there are no homes available. So I
It's
had
because previously nobody lived there.
exactly, yeah. So, yeah, that's definitely something to be learned from the past and from this movie and about oil in general. I have my own ideas about energy and energy independence and stuff like that, but I don't think that's necessarily relevant to the conversation.
Well, it's relevant in the way that you know if we were if we weren't looking at other countries for their oil, if
Mm.
it's like we don't have to pay these people that we know are doing bad things to get our oil, we could then hold them responsible for their human rights violations. And
Yeah,
as to where the movie kind of made it out, like Dick Cheney, one way or another, was going to link it to Saddam.
yeah,
And so,
yeah. For the most part, I think the movie was pretty factual. I believe that they did their research. I don't. Right when the movie ended, when the credits were rolling, I tried to look up some fact checking online, and I couldn't find anything that was easily digestible. There are some long articles,
we
but
did try to go straight from the movie
yeah,
right back here to recording. We didn't talk about it in between.
we literally just got out of the movie, so I didn't have a whole lot of time to research the facts on this movie. But I believe it was mostly true for the most part. I do believe it was dramatized, and I think that to the extent that they showed Dick Cheney had power over George W. Bush, I think it was they made it seem like George Bush was more of a pawn. I think in real life George Bush did have a lot of the decision making. I do believe that Dick Cheney did have a lot of behind the scenes work. I mean, in who's that fat liberal documentarian?
Michael Moore,
Michael Moore and his movie about Bush or 9/11. I can't remember what movie it was.
Fahrenheit 9/11.
Yeah, it might have been Fahrenheit 9/11 or Capitalist the movie or whatever, one of his movies.
Capitalism, a love story.
Yeah, I can't remember which one it was, but there's that scene where it's Bush is giving a speech, and then either Cheney or one of his advisors, goes up to him and gives him the wrap it up signal, and he's like, "Who the fuck is this guy telling the president to wrap up his speech?" So I do believe that there was a lot of uh, not just Dick Cheney, but I believe that there were several people behind the scenes in the Bush administration who were kind of controlling what he was doing. And I have no doubt in my mind that situation is returning with Trump as well. I don't think Trump is making all those decisions. I think he has round out his White House staff with people who help him make those decisions and probably make the decisions for him. Because I don't believe that Trump is much smarter than George W. Bush.
Well,
I think
I
their
think
intelligence is probably about the same.
if the movie itself is actually completely factual, in a way, it almost seems like we're safer with Trump, because so far, like there were.
Well, the movie that you have to remember that final scene before the credits, they had the words going up talking about how Dick Cheney helped the president get way more powers, especially as far as torture goes, and that any president can call up those powers. And I think that was a strong pointing at Trump, like saying, "Hey, look at what Trump can do." It was a scare tactic. It was fear mongering, which is what I hate about the liberal agenda. But I think that is definitely the truth.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and they talked about it a little, or briefly mentioned Trump or showed like his supporters in the end. But I don't think Mike Pence is like
Oh no,
pulling any strings.
I don't think Mike Pence
Trump.
is anywhere near what Dick Cheney was. I think Dick Cheney was, based on this movie, he was a mastermind and he knew what was going on, all the time. I don't see that in Mike Pence.
Well, it's not just like I don't see it in Mike Pence. It's that like okay, the character of Mike Pence he might have more moral character than Dick Cheney.
Yeah.
But it's not just the mastermind. It's also the puppet. Like, one, I think the movie made George Bush out to be a puppet way more than he actually was. Yeah. I don't think Dick Cheney was pulling as many strings. Mm-hmm. Not that he wasn't pulling any, but he has been referred to as the most powerful vice president in history.
Yeah.
And, Joe Biden, I remember, had really strong words during the campaign, his 2008 campaign for vice president, about Dick Cheney. So I don't, but I don't think he was pulling the strings as much. But I also think if, imagine a Trump-Cheney situation. You think Cheney would have had 5 seconds to give any input before Trump just went off on one of his crazy rants or whatever?
It's very true that Trump is way less controllable than Bush was.
Yeah.
Because Bush had his father to look up to, and he kind of had some family esteem that he needed to adhere to. But
Trump and all of these people, whether it's Cheney or Bush or Rumsfeld or Pence or anybody now, or any Democrats, you cannot put them in the same category with Trump, and it's just simply because of character and behavior.
Yeah.
Nobody else acts like that. And I don't know. So something else I wanted to mention was they talked about what did they call it? Executive.
Yeah, I don't remember, but that was one of the good parts of the movie is that they broke the fourth wall several times to kind of explain to the audience what was going on, and that was one of them. It was the executive something or other, but it gave the president way more power, and the idea was behind it that because he's the president and that his greatest objective is to protect the American people, is that anything he does can't be wrong because he's the president. Well, that's how they described it.
Yeah, and I've heard that philosophy before, and I feel like in a classroom
it's been brought up a lot recently with Trump.
It has been, yeah, and I was going to get to that. Don't interrupt me. Anyway, I'm just kidding. But I feel like that it was brought up to in a classroom with me once, but it was explained to me almost like as if it was factual, but it was more like the president can't be charged for doing anything wrong without an impeachment process.
Yeah.
So let's say Donald Trump got a DUI, which he wouldn't because he doesn't drink, but he can't actually formally be charged with that until the impeachment process goes through.
I think the real world thing of it is him cheating on his taxes and using his lawyers like Michael Cohen and stuff to cheat on their taxes and commit other fraud. And that's one of the discussions, if you follow the news, that they're talking about, because Michael Cohen was convicted for 3 years or whatever. He's going to jail, and Trump was one of his biggest clients, and he broke the law for Trump. So that's what the debate is that, hey, Trump broke the law with his lawyer before he was president. Can he be convicted for that now that he's president? And Giuliani is the one saying, no, he's the president. He can't do anything wrong. And so that's exactly what you're saying, is that you can't get the president in trouble unless there's an impeachment process. And
what I'm saying is that's how I learned about it. Now, can the president do something illegal? I'd say absolutely. Like, there was a part.
War crimes are illegal. And
yeah,
pretty much Obama did war crimes,
Yeah, whatever goes on behind, the Oval Office, some of it's going to be illegal. It's just the nature of the thing, secrecy and all that stuff. But we aren't monarch. We aren't a dictatorship. So the idea that the president can't do anything wrong or can't do anything illegal, like there's the legal philosophy behind it, but I don't think a lot of people argue that because the president does it, it makes it legal. I think it's just that until he's convicted and removed from office, he can't be held liable from it.
Yeah.
But I think the movie was pushing more the idea that Cheney was trying to push the limits of the executive branch, which perhaps he was. But I feel like they made it out to be more like, oh, this is just what, a lot of people think. And
yeah.
I don't know.
What do you think the movie should have focused more on? Like, what do you wish that they had focused more on? What do you think it was lacking in?
Well, obviously, with any movie, it's lacking the other side. But of course, I mean, you're not going to say, "Hey, Dick Cheney, we're making fun of you. You want to come on here and talk about it?" Also, there was so much it tried to pack into a 2-hour time span that it was you can't get if they were just talking about what Dick Cheney did during one set of events on September 11th or leading to the Iraq War, that could have fit into a 2-hour movie.
Yeah.
But they tried to put his age 20 through current into, and then his family life. They tried to put all that into there. So I think it should have focused a little bit more on one part. It might have taken away some of the interesting aspects, but it would have made it more relevant.
It might be one of those things where it's worth watching the deleted scenes to see what kind of stuff they hit the cutting room floor that kind of would have given the movie more emphasis or background, I guess. It makes sense that they didn't put this in there, but I wish they had done more with Cheney's contribution to the election against Gore, because that's an election that's really interesting to me, and I wish that we had seen what Cheney had done during that election. I understand that they bypassed that because that wasn't really the focus of the movie, and we don't know if he really did anything important during that time. But I kind of wish that we at least saw Gore.
What do you think he would have done?
Well, I just would have been interested to see a little bit more about that process, because we kind of see him talking to Bush about being his vice president, and then Bush is elected. We see election night. We don't see anything in between that. I kind of wish we had seen a little bit more of that.
Yeah, you don't see anything in between election night and then the Supreme Court decision.
Yeah.
And the fact is between that night and the Supreme Court decision that ultimately stopped the recount in Florida, there were probably at least, maybe I'm exaggerating, but I looked at the whole record. There were probably about 100 different suits filed in different federal courts between both the Gore camp and the Bush camp.
Yeah.
And one of them was actually to make it so that Dick Cheney's home state had to be referred to as Texas, because that's technically where he was living.
Oh, okay.
But he claimed Wyoming as his home state. And as we talked about on one of the previous episodes, the Texas electors couldn't then vote for both Bush and Cheney. And so ultimately would have had to have been a different vice president. Yeah. But the courts didn't hold that one up. But, you didn't really see a lot between that time. But, I don't know really what the character, if that would have, the point was to tell us the character of Cheney, and I don't know that would have provided us with anything else.
Also, I would have liked to see a little bit more of his reaction to Obama getting elected, and seeing if there was any interaction between him and Obama, if they had cast Obama somehow with another, actor, and had some sort of dialogue between them. I don't know if there was any dialogue between them, but that would have been interesting to see.
I don't remember ever seeing any dialogue between the two. And I don't remember, again, I was 18 when Barack Obama won and became president. And I don't remember seeing, I remember him talking to George Bush, and I remember interviews with Dick Cheney. I don't remember the two of them talking. And I don't think, I think Dick Cheney was kind of done at that point, Yeah. And especially if we're saying, his goal was to get oil or whatnot, he was, he was done once we got into Iraq,
Yeah.
So I don't know that there was anything left to get out of him from there.
I think there's things I wanted them to add, between his election, some of his more political history, and I think that what they should have done is not focused on his health and his heart so much. Like that led for good comedic moments when he was having the heart attacks, but then you were like, right at the end of the movie, when there's that whole heart transplant scene that took way too long. I think his heart health literally could have just been a sentence before the credits of the movie. I mean, I don't care about that. That doesn't affect me. I don't care about Dick Cheney's health. I don't think that does anything for the plot except build his character a little bit, but I'm more interested in what he did in power instead of his health. That it builds his character, but I feel like that they spent way too much time on it and they could have used that. I mean, the movie was 2 hours and 15 minutes. Obviously, they couldn't extend it anymore. But if they had gotten rid of all that heart stuff and focused on something more interesting, that would have been better, I think.
Or at least more relevant.
Yeah, but what I did like about the movie was that they made sure to focus on people who are still in politics today. A lot of names I recognize. Back in the when Bush was elected, I was in elementary school. I didn't pay attention to politics, but a lot of the names I recognized because they were people who were relevant in this day and age, and I really like that. Also, they didn't focus a whole lot on Trump. There were a couple times where they kind of alluded to, hey, because Dick Cheney did this is why Trump has so much power. But it was so minimal, and we only saw Trump once in the entire movie, and it was for a millisecond because it was just a brief flash of him holding a bunch of money. And I thought it was nice that we got to watch something political that just wasn't like, oh my God, it's another Trump power hour right now.
Yeah. And I mean, you saw the same, you saw a lot of names now, of, like you saw Hillary Clinton expressing her support for Iraq. You saw Mike Pence expressing his support for Iraq. And then, you see like both of them today would say that the Iraq war was not a good thing, and as would most people who supported it back then.
And Colin Powell's whole "I regret making that entire speech," the speech that kind of like the way the movie, I'm not sure what the reality behind it was, but the way the movie presented his speech was that it was a huge turning point and that it pretty much started ISIS and stuff like that. So that was interesting to see.
Yeah, I'd like to look into that a little bit more because
I've done a decent amount of research on the whole where ISIS came from. I just on YouTube they have some independent creators have done some good videos kind of explaining how they were born, and a lot of it was because of our direct involvement in the Iraq war. We went in and destroyed their government and then walked out, and it created a vacuum for a terrorist organization.
Well, yeah, and so some people say that like had we stayed along a little bit later for them to stabilize themselves, like things might have gone a little more smoothly for them. Yeah. ISIS wouldn't have been able to rise to power if they'd become a full democracy, but because it was kind of like, okay, we got rid of the bad guys, we're leaving, like you fixed a temporary problem, you put a Band-Aid on it.
Well, the fact of the matter is that we shouldn't have done the Iraq war anyways. I mean, that was a big part of the election in 2016 is that they were asking Trump, what do you think about the Iraq war? And he contradicted himself because, like, when it started, he was for it, but then after it started, he was against it. And there was kind of just some, like, toss-up in the air about how he really felt about the Iraq war. But I remember that was a big deal in the election process of, like, what does he think of the Iraq war, and was it a good idea? Because if we thought it was a good idea, then he would have been out. No one would have voted for him. But he constantly was like, no, I was against the Iraq war.
He said that. He said, like, oh, maybe one time I brought it up, like, in passing, like, or, like, on the Howard Stern show.
Yeah.
He's like, maybe I said, oh, Iraq war, sure. He's like, but I never actually committed to it. But, I mean, the same was true with Hillary, is that she voted for it, and then she's against it. Now I listened to her.
That's why she didn't win, because she was a bad Democrat candidate.
I mean, but
one of many.
What I'm saying is, like, most of the population now thinks the Iraq war was a bad idea, but you both had candidates that had some suggestion of support in the beginning, and both now say it's bad. So it's kind of just like
in the time of 9/11, people just in the movie really touched on this, which is a good idea. Is that, hey, people want someone to be angry at, and Dick Cheney was like, Iraq has oil, let's blame them. And the movie did a really good job of presenting that, of like, people don't know what Al Qaeda is, they don't know where Saddam Hussein is, they need a country. And that's when Dick Cheney was like, Iraq has oil, let's go there. And he found that one guy that Colin Powell mentioned in his speech, which is the guy who they said started ISIS, and they blamed him, and the reason why they blamed him was because he was in Iraq. Even though he wasn't a Saddam Hussein, I had never heard his name before this movie.
I'd heard something separate from this movie that, and I'm sure this wasn't the whole reason for the invasion of Iraq, but
the thing's so complicated. Not even a 2 hour long movie can even touch on the whole breadth of that situation.
I heard that though that Iraq was supplying weapons to Al Qaeda, and then also, one thing Bush mentioned was that Saddam Hussein kept repeating, like, I have weapons, kind of as a show of power.
Yeah.
And Bush later said, it's regretful that we went in without all the facts and knowledge, but think about how dangerous of a man that still is.
The movie touched on that a little bit too, and I don't know how truthful this was. This seems like something that they could have just rummaged up on their own. But one of the things they said is when they were trying to find like a reason to go attack Iraq, they were coming up with sources that were not trustable. And they said, we need an anonymous source. Who wants to be an anonymous source? That was a really good scene. But how truthful is that? We don't really know.
Yeah, and also
that's kind of sketchy.
When they called somebody in from the energy department and they got the person operating the phone.
Exactly.
Told them to sit in the hallway.
But that does seem like a loophole that would make sense.
I mean, yeah, but a lot of this is, again, I guess my overall point would be a lot of this was behind the door stuff. And, you can only, like, most stuff, it's not like the Nixon tapes where you get to hear what actually happened, Yeah. It's, you end up just hearing what different people say. And that's kind of how a lot of things are in politics, is it's hearsay.
Well, it's also Hollywood, you only get one viewpoint in Hollywood. You're not going to get the opposite viewpoint.
Well, even if they'd done the opposite viewpoint, would they have still covered the aspects that make the conservative side look bad? Whatever the conservative side of the argument, or the pro-Cheney side of the argument. Yeah. I mean, they wouldn't have done anything to make him look bad. So.
One thing that I did like about the movie, well, not necessarily that I liked about the movie, but one thing I did notice about the movie is that there was a lot of time where it was like, this is a scary situation. Dick Cheney is an untrustworthy person. He did so much bad stuff for our country. But then there were times in the movie where you were like rooting for Dick Cheney and you were rooting for George Bush, and it was like they did scenes where it didn't necessarily promote him and encourage him and support him, but it was like, Dick Cheney is a really smart dude. He was really powerful. He knew what he was doing. He's someone to be respected. And I did enjoy that they kind of put those points in there, just so it didn't feel like if they didn't put those moments in there, it could have been just a horror movie,
Just like about a sadistic person or whatnot.
Exactly. Like they could have turned that movie into a horror movie real easily if they had just focused on like how scary and bad of a person. Like Dick Cheney, they could have they really focused on how silent he was. They almost could have turned him into like a Jaws character, like the shark in Jaws, where he doesn't say anything, but behind the scenes he's working the game, and they just show a bunch of terrorist footage and people dying, and all of a sudden it's like Vice, the horror movie.
Well, I mean, some of it kind of felt that way.
Oh yeah, there were definitely scenes that was like they were trying to trigger you.
Yeah, like they were like they'd show explosions and stuff and be like, "This is because of Dick Cheney," and it's like, things are so much more complicated than that. And
instead of the hard stuff, they really should have focused on why he did it and the pro-conservative side. And of course, they would never do that because it's a Hollywood movie. But it would have been nice if instead of focusing on his hard stuff, which I think was unnecessary, it would have been nice to hear the conservative side, the why this was a good idea, and the positive outcomes. I mean, maybe there were good things that happened with the Iraq War. Maybe that's why gas prices have remained, relatively cheap.
Well, I mean, of course, there's good things that happen with it. You just don't always see these results.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned, that George Bush Oprah interview, it was in Oprah's studio, and he said, ultimately, I don't regret the Iraq War because though it cost us thousands of lives, I think about the amount the millions of lives it saved or made better today. And even Oprah's audience started clapping. Now, maybe they were just doing that because it was, he said something
Yeah.
positive then. But, I mean, you don't get to see what doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm sure something positive came up of it, but it's weighing the cost versus, what happened. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Man, I don't know. Anything else to say about the movie?
One other thing is, I think one thing they could have cut out was the relationship. Like, I think having his wife in there was really important.
Oh, she was awesome. And I didn't mention that at all, but in the first half of the movie, she was a really important part of his life, and I liked that a lot. That was really cool.
And an important part of while he was resting after his first heart attack, an important part of why he got elected.
Mm-hmm.
But
it was also really good seeing, like, he came out as the good guy when their daughter came out as gay, whereas the mom was like, she was the, the iffy one.
The mom still wasn't that bad, though. She was just like, life's going to be hard for you.
Yeah.
But when the daughter came out as gay, what was weird to me is they used that as the one moment to make Dick Cheney like a good person. She's crying at. Were they in a hospital? Oh, yeah, she got in a car accident.
Yeah.
She was crying at the hospital, and she said, like in tears, she said, "I'm gay." And the first thing he does is he said, "Honey, we'll always love you," and then embraces her and kisses her and on the head or whatever. And
that was a really powerful scene. I think they did a good job.
It was, but it's like, why did they add that?
I think a lot of that fluffy stuff was to humanize him and to build his character. Because if they didn't put that stuff in there, we would have missed a lot of the depth of him as a character.
Well, and because with that, it makes me think about, okay, this is what Dick Cheney did, but what about all the other leaders? And like, how much horrible potential do we all have inside of us,
Yeah.
And so that part kind of made me think, like, he's not somebody who is sending just people to the gas chambers, He's not like a Hitler.
Yeah.
So really, he could be, like, any of us could be in that situation where we're Dick Cheney and we see that there's something we want. We have an opportunity to get it. And so it kind of made me feel like the only reason we have a movie about this guy is because he got to that position.
Well, I think the reason why he's an interesting character is because he's outstanding. Many people have been in that position, and he was outstanding above them all in a way that, like they said multiple times in the movie, the vice president is just a label. It's a worthless position. But he turned it into a serious position of power. I think that's why he's interesting. And also, I think they were trying to allude him to not necessarily a Hitler type, but a violent dictator type. I think the movie lacked the budget and the ability to really show the torture that he did. Like, they had a couple of torture scenes. You saw some guy get captured in a van and stripped naked. You saw some guy get put in a box. You saw a little bit of waterboarding. Is that what it's called? Waterboarding. Yeah. But, from some of the reports I've heard and read online, the torture that has happened in America is really violent and terrible. And I was kind of hoping, as a Saw fan, that they would show a little bit more of that. Also, you can't effectively present the good and bad of a character if you're not willing to show it. And I feel like they really should have pulled back the curtain on, like, just really one fucked up torture scene and then him, like, sleeping peacefully at night. I think that would have been a really powerful scene. Yeah, but
it's different because we can talk about enhanced interrogation or torture, whatever you want to call it, the nice name or the bad name for it. But the fact of the matter is that it's different when you're sitting in an office without any threat to you, thousands of miles away.
Well, that would be.
And your first concern is the safety of your people,
Yeah.
Then it's like, it's only like, I think it's in the moments, like the torture versus the torturee, which probably isn't a word.
Yeah.
Like, that's what the character you'd want to capture.
For sure, I understand that. I think not for presenting the facts, it would have been interesting, but cinematically, one of those scenes where he's peacefully sitting with his family eating dinner on a beautiful day in his white picket fence with his green yard, and then spliced throughout that is some person just getting fucking tortured, kind of sociopathical kind of clip. I think that would have been good. And I really liked the end scene. I think it was the final scene of the movie before the credits when he looks directly at the camera and he says, "I do not regret anything I did because I did it all so that you could sleep peacefully." And that was a really interesting part of the movie.
It almost like turned it around, because it almost made it like pro Cheney in the end because the reporter's asking like, 2/3 of people are against the Iraq War. Do you regret it? And he said, no. Mm-hmm. And he said, I do this. The decisions I've made have all been for the safety of the people so they can go on having these opinions, sleeping peacefully at night. Yeah. And I was like, and then it cuts to the credits, and I'm like, what message were they ending on there? Like,
I think that was a really good point because it's a really good way to end the movie to make you think, because you can see, I don't know necessarily who the demographic of this movie is. I think it's mostly older people.
Yeah.
But, if a younger person, if you saw, all those liberal screaming girls who, were crying when Trump was elected, if you sat them in front of one of the movies and that end credits or that last scene played, it might make them think. It might make them open their mind just a little bit. Doubtful, but
no, definitely.
But
doubtful.
I did want to say, fuck, I can't remember what I wanted to say. That's okay.
That's all right, because one other thing I wanted to say briefly was that I remember watching.
Real quick.
Yeah,
the final scene of him turning towards the camera and saying, "I'm not sure if those are words that he actually quoted in that interview. I'm not sure where those words came from. The director or the writer, he was the director and writer. He might have just written those words as a summary of what Dick Cheney did, or they might be a direct quote from Cheney. I do not know myself."
But whether or not, though, you said the point's to make us think,
mm-hmm.
and often when a movie ends like that, it's to make you think about the movie. For me, it makes me think about like, what was their direction? It doesn't leave me thinking like, who is this Dick Cheney guy? It leaves me thinking like, what message are they trying to send? Because most of this has been, here's what he's done wrong, and then him giving a very good explanation of sometimes these bad things happen in order for the greater good.
There's monsters in the world.
The last thing I wanted to mention was that I remember watching the vice presidential debate between Joe Biden and Sarah Palin, and one of the questions was, it said Dick Cheney said he considers his the role of vice president as part of the executive branch and the legislative because they break ties. And in the movie it shows how he had an office in the House of Representatives, 2 offices in the Senate, 1 at the CIA. But basically Joe Biden ended up answering the question. This is real life. He ends up saying like, no, absolutely not. The vice president is part of the executive branch, case closed. And I agree with him, but I didn't completely disagree with what Sarah Palin said, which is that in a way the vice president is part of the Senate, not just to cast votes, but also to be there during big votes, like a Supreme Court confirmation. So there is interaction between the two. And the movie tried to kind of argue that it makes the vice president not part of either branch.
Yeah.
But I would say it more makes him part of both.
Mm-hmm.
But
their argument for why he's their argument was that because he's part of both branches, he's technically part of neither, and that no one has say over the vice president. Like that was their argument for why the vice president is such a
like he reports directly to no one.
Yeah, because he's part of 2 different houses of government that no one actually has control over what the vice president does, and I thought that was a really interesting idea.
But I would say it's pretty clear though that, except for that little spot where the Constitution grants him that little power within the legislative branch, that he's part of the executive branch, and that's part of the checks and balances, and that's why that's, that way. It's like saying when a Supreme Court takes up the president's executive order, they suddenly become part of the executive branch. That's just not the case. They're still the judicial branch.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, they work together, and then they also do things, to prevent each other from rising to too much power. So, but anyway, so
I have one final thing. We want to keep this podcast under an hour, but I have one final thing to ask you. What do you think of Dick Cheney? What is your opinion on him?
I always, like I said, I was 5th grade through 12th grade during the Bush presidency. Whatever he did behind the scenes, he must have done it really well because I don't ever remember the newscasts being about like Dick Cheney strikes again or Dick Cheney does this.
Yeah.
So,
well, in the beginning of the movie, they said this is the hardest guy to research because he's been so private and secretive about his life.
Well, I mean, and that's kind of how vice presidents are. They don't really come out of the woodworks except to, as I think Jon Stewart put it once. He's like, your job is to break ties and attend funerals. Like, so I mean, you often don't learn about them that much unless
And that was another thing he said about having a gay daughter and like his taxes and stuff. Is that because he was the vice president, they didn't look into any of that at all. They didn't scrutinize him like they did the president.
Yeah. Anyway.
Any other opinions on Dick Cheney? Overall, do you like him or do you not like him?
I would say, I mean, he's lost relevancy today. Yeah. It's not like he ran afterwards. I don't think he's going to be part of politics ever again.
He's probably towards the end of his life.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when he got that replacement heart, I think it was at the very beginning of the Obama administration.
They said it would give him 10 years.
Yeah, they said it would give him, and not just in the movie. I also remember watching that on TV. They said it could give him another 10 years. Well, he's at, like
10 years, I think.
15 or something now. Like,
oh, okay.
Because, I mean, if that was in 2009, what are we like now?
2018. It's like 10 years.
Okay, yeah, you're right.
2019 is literally tomorrow.
Okay, you got a good point. Unless he got the heart transplant.
He is going to die tomorrow.
When he was vice president.
I am
so, I mean, I don't know. I mean, he doesn't seem to be in frail health right now, though, so he could still have another good 5 or 10 years. But I don't think it's going to be in public office. So my opinion about him now is I was too young to be a good judge of character. Plus, whenever you're a judge of character of a politician, you never really know who they are.
Yeah.
And right now, he's irrelevant. But, I mean, the movie did a good job of showing us a little bit about him and his life. So,
my thoughts on Dick Cheney are based on this movie and just the little bit of prior knowledge I had before going to see this movie. I generally think that he's probably on the bad side as far as my opinions go, mostly because he was such a warmonger and because he was a part of capitalism. I think, the movie made it seem like one of the main reasons he went to Iraq was for oil because the oil companies were like, hey, look, we want these squares on the map in Iraq. And so he was like, hey, we're going to go attack Iraq and get control over those. And I think as a libertarian, I'm against warmongers and capitalism. I think that the only way capitalism can succeed is if we have a truthful, honest system where the wealthy aren't buying the politicians and telling them what to do. I think that capitalism can only work with a free system where everyone has a fair and equal chance and no one is getting
But a free system doesn't always allow for a free and equal chance because there's some people who have more than others.
Well, the fact of the matter is that if you support capitalism, we might as well just go to socialism because capitalism's not going to work. True capitalism will work, and that's why I'm a libertarian.
I've heard some other terms. I've never heard of crapitalism. I'd be
crony capitalism. Okay, capitalism.
The same thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Crapitalism came from one of my libertarian podcasts, so
I was hoping we'd get through one podcast without you bringing up libertarianism, but
of course not.
Of course not, because you're crazy. So, anyway, good talk.
Yeah, I don't think that we need a final word. I mean, I have a couple more things to say about the movie, but nothing super major.
You want to say them? Now's your chance.
I wish that there was a final scene with a little bit of... it would have dated the movie for the future, but I kind of wish there was a final scene with a little bit of wisdom about what's going on in the political climate and with Trump. I kind of wish that there was maybe showing some sort of discussion between Cheney and Trump. I don't know if they've ever talked to each other or if they've ever had an interview where Cheney gave his opinion on Trump or if there was, the movie was trying to remain so current to our current political climate. I wish that they kind of had a final scene that just showed Trump or something, just a final Trump scene. That's kind of, I think that would have been nice.
In a way, it's like you got a picture of the era.
Yeah.
And that's what you get, you know.
I don't necessarily think it would have made it a better movie, and it would have dated it, because as soon as you watch it when Trump is out of office, it kind of, that final scene would have been kind of dumb. But I think I would have appreciated one final scene that was kind of like Trump and then credits.
We say enough of him, so anyway.
Yeah, that's very true. Cool. Well, thank you so much for watching our special episode of our podcast. Look, if I finish up this outro in less than 6 minutes, we'll be under an hour. I think that's our first episode under an hour.
Can you do that?
I'm going to try my best. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, share, all that kind of good stuff. We're on SoundCloud and YouTube. I forgot to mention that in the beginning of that podcast. Oh well. Let us know if you like this episode, because if another political movie comes out, I think this was a pretty fun deal, and we'd like to do it again sometime.
Yeah.
It'd be awesome. Cool. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.